Curtis and Son Funeral Home, the North Chapel on Highway 21 in Sylacauga, and the Childersburg Chapel on Highway 280 in Childersburg for pre-need funerals, burials, or cremations since the mid-70s. It's Curtis and Son Funeral Home, Sylacauga, Childersburg. Call 256-245-4361 for pre-need to at-need funeral services, funerals, burials, or cremations since 1975. It's Curtis and Son Funeral Home, Sylacauga, Childersburg. In obituary news this morning for this Friday, the 3rd day of December, graveside service for Marion Kemp Embry, age 98 of Sylacauga, will be today at 11 a.m. from Evergreen Cemetery. Brother Mike Kaiser will officiate that service. Mrs. Embry died Wednesday, December 1st. Online condolences at curtisondsonfh.com. Curtis and Son Funeral Home, North Chapel, directing that service. In other obituary news this morning, visitation for Mr. William Rayfield will be this evening from 5 till 8 o'clock at Providence Baptist Church in Harpersville. Funeral service tomorrow morning at 11 at Providence Baptist Church. Online condolences at curtisondsonfh.com. Curtis and Son Funeral Home, North Chapel, directing that service. Also, funeral arrangements for Jarrett Ledford. That funeral service will be, visitation will be held on December 5th from 1 until 2 o'clock at the Childersburg Chapel of Curtis and Son Funeral Home. Then the funeral service at 2 o'clock on Sunday from Curtis and Son Childersburg Chapel. Burial in the Green Hill Cemetery. Curtis and Son Funeral Home, Childersburg Chapel, in charge of the arrangements. And Mr. Jerry Meeks of Sylacauga died at his residence on Thursday night. Curtis and Son Funeral Home, North Chapel, announcing the arrangements. Funeral service for Robert Vernon Hasty, age 79 of Sylacauga, will be Saturday at 2 o'clock from the Chapel of Radley Smith Funeral Home. The Reverends Charles Carnegie and John Woodall officiating. Burial in the Fayetteville Methodist Church Cemetery. Mr. Hasty died December 1st at St. Vincent's Hospital in Birmingham. He was retired from the United States Air Force after 20 years and 14 days. Visitation Saturday, noon until 2 o'clock at the funeral home. Radley Smith Funeral Home, Sylacauga, directing. Celebration of life for Joyce Robertson, age 67, is Saturday at 1 o'clock from Coosa Valley Baptist Church Cemetery in Vincent, with the Reverend Willie J. Posey officiating. Community Funeral Home, Sylacauga, in charge of the arrangements. Online condolences at communityfuneralhome.org. In other obituary news on this Friday morning, homegoing celebration remembering the life of Ms. Juanita Gooden Morris of Alpine will be Saturday at 3 o'clock from S.M. Goodson Funeral Home Chapel, with Pastor Clint Walker officiating. Interment in the Pointer Family Cemetery of Alpine. Public viewing today, 3 till 6 at the funeral home. S.M. Goodson Funeral Home and Crematory directing. In other obituary notes this morning, graveside service for Lawrence Taylor Jr. will be today at 11 o'clock from Tallahatchie Church Cemetery. Community Funeral Home in Sylacauga, in charge of the arrangements. First Lady Mary Gregory passed away November the 29th. Funeral service Saturday morning at 11 o'clock from Friendship Baptist Church, with interment in the Sweet Home AME Church in Greenville, Alabama. Visitation today 4 until 6 o'clock at the funeral home. Wright's Funeral Home directing. Celebration of life for Lawrence D. Taylor Jr. We just mentioned that one. That's today at 11 o'clock from Tallahatchie Missionary Baptist Church Cemetery in Childersburg. The Reverend Frederick Jemison officiating. Community Funeral Home directing. And a funeral ceremony for Pastor George Lewis Lauderdale, age 69, is 1 o'clock today at St. John Baptist Church in Sylacauga, with Pastor Henry Sterling, the eulogist. Burial in the Sylacauga Cemetery. S.M. Goodson Funeral Home and Crematory in Talladega in charge of the arrangements. This obituary report this morning, courtesy of Curtis & Son Funeral Home, the North Chapel on Highway 21 in Sylacauga, the Childersburg Chapel on Highway 280 in Childersburg. Pre-need funerals, burials, and cremation since 1975. Curtis & Son Funeral Home, Sylacauga, Childersburg. 5 minutes.